Budget cuts, nothing personal. The VP smirked as security hovered over my desk. 25 minutes later, I discovered the $40 million secret they fired me to hide, and it was about to destroy everything they'd built. My name is Avery Stone, and I'm 27 years old. The VP's smirk still burns in my memory like acid on skin. Budget cuts, Avery. Nothing personal. Security hovered at my desk while HR repeated their robotic script about restructuring for operational efficiency during challenging market conditions. My chest felt hollow as 3 years of unwavering dedication got erased in 3 minutes of corporate theater. I'd worked nights, weekends, holidays, optimizing Riverton Industries' financial systems while my colleagues went home to their families and normal lives. I'd missed birthday parties, anniversary dinners, and family gatherings because I believed hard work and loyalty would be rewarded in this company. At 9:02 a.m., I was a valued financial analyst with a spotless performance record and glowing reviews. By 9:27 a.m., I was cleaning out my desk under armed guard like a common criminal who couldn't be trusted with company property. But as I reached for my personal notebooks with trembling hands, my eyes landed on a line in the vendor portal that made my blood freeze. A transaction I'd been investigating for weeks was right there on my screen, and something was very, very wrong with the numbers I'd been meticulously tracking. The ledger entry wasn't supposed to exist. I was absolutely certain of that after spending months reconciling vendor accounts and building comprehensive financial models. A deferred balance pool, worth exactly $40 million, sitting untouched and flagged under vendor rebates like a financial ghost haunting the company's books. I'd found it in less than half an hour after being fired, but proving it would take weeks of careful investigation. 3 weeks ago, I'd filed a detailed help desk ticket asking about this exact anomaly, complete with supporting documentation and analysis, and it had been shut down immediately by CFO Olivia Kane herself with a terse, "Not your concern, focus on assigned tasks," response. My breath caught in my throat as the pieces started clicking together like dominoes falling in perfect, terrifying sequence. Why would anyone bury such a massive amount of money? Why refuse to explain it to the analyst specifically responsible for vendor reconciliation and financial integrity? And most importantly, why fire me right now, right when I was getting dangerously close to understanding what this money really represented and where it came from? The timing wasn't coincidental, it was calculated, desperate, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. Someone had been watching my investigation far more closely than I'd realized, and they decided I'd gotten too close to the truth for their comfort. I stuffed my notebooks into my bag with shaking hands before security could notice what I was doing or confiscate them as company property. Every calculation, every anomaly I'd tracked over months of meticulous digging, was right there in pen and ink, handwritten evidence they couldn't delete from their servers, hack from their cloud storage, or make disappear with a few keystrokes. VP Bryce Holloway thought he was watching me walk out humiliated and defeated, another corporate casualty of efficiency measures and budget optimization. Instead, I was carrying the fuse that would blow up their entire house of cards and expose years of financial manipulation. My notebooks contained vendor correspondence, email timestamps, reconciliation reports, pattern analysis, and transaction traces that painted a damning picture of deliberate financial manipulation spanning multiple quarters and fiscal years. As security escorted me through the marble lobby, past colleagues who avoided eye contact out of fear for their own jobs and futures, I clutched those notebooks like they contained nuclear launch codes. Because in a way, they did contain something equally explosive. 3 years of meticulous record-keeping and financial detective work was about to become their absolute worst nightmare, and they had no idea what was coming for them. Outside in the parking garage, I sat in my car staring at the HR termination packet, my hands still trembling from adrenaline and shock. The paperwork was surprisingly thick for a simple budget cut, filled with legal language and confidentiality clauses that seemed excessive. My phone buzzed with an urgent email marked "Confidential Exit Agreement," a severance package that seemed far too generous for someone supposedly fired for budgetary reasons and cost reduction. I laughed bitterly as I read the extensive non-disclosure clauses and the threats of legal action for violating them. They wanted me gagged in silence before I could connect the dots that were already forming crystal clear patterns in my analytical mind. The severance wasn't compensation, it was hush money, plain and simple, designed to buy my silence and compliance. But silence wasn't an option anymore, not when I'd stumbled onto something this massive and potentially criminal. I started my car and drove straight home, my mind racing with possibilities and my stomach churning with equal parts terror and determination. The real work was just beginning, and this time I'd be fighting for justice instead of a paycheck. I called Sophia, my best friend and corporate lawyer, the moment I got home and locked my door behind me. "Avery, don't touch that data directly or access any company systems," she warned urgently after I explained what I discovered. "Document everything meticulously, but let's route this through proper legal channels to protect you from retaliation. If $40 million is being hidden from shareholders and auditors, we're not talking about sloppy accounting or bookkeeping errors. We're talking about securities fraud with potential federal implications." My pulse pounded as that word hung in the air like a death sentence. Fraud. That single word could destroy careers, trigger federal investigations, send people to prison for decades, and ruin lives permanently. But it could also expose the truth that Riverton's executives were desperately trying to bury beneath layers of corporate bureaucracy and intimidation. Sophia's voice was steady but urgent as she continued, "We need to build an absolutely airtight case before they realize what you know and how much evidence you have. One mistake, one procedural error, and they'll bury you in legal hell that will bankrupt you and destroy your reputation forever." She paused, then added something that made my blood run cold, "Avery, careers have been destroyed for less than this. Some whistleblowers never recover from corporate retaliation campaigns." And deep down, I knew walking away would mean they'd win. I followed Sophia's advice to the letter, building my case like a careful architect constructing a fortress that could withstand corporate lawyers and federal scrutiny. Screenshots with timestamps showing the hidden balance and its complete transaction history going back 18 months. Public vendor statements from their quarterly reports and SEC filings that I cross-referenced with internal data. Copies of my original help desk ticket and the dismissive, almost panicked response from Olivia's office that came within 30 minutes of filing. I wasn't stealing confidential files or hacking into protected systems. I was documenting publicly available information and my own legitimate work product that I'd created during my employment. Every click, every search, every download, I logged carefully with dates, times, and detailed descriptions of what I was accessing and why it was relevant to my investigation. If Riverton wanted to wage legal war against me, I'd fight clean and by the rules, but I'd also fight to win decisively with overwhelming evidence. The pattern was undeniable once I laid it out systematically in spreadsheets and timelines. $40 million in vendor rebates had been deliberately hidden from financial statements for multiple quarters, making Riverton appear significantly less profitable than it actually was. But more disturbing was what I discovered about the timing. Every major financial decision had been made immediately after payments were hidden, suggesting coordination at the highest levels of management. And the balance wasn't static. It seemed to grow every quarter like a snowball nobody wanted to acknowledge, fed by increasing vendor volumes that should have been disclosed to shareholders. This wasn't incompetence or oversight, this was a carefully orchestrated conspiracy to defraud shareholders. By noon, Sophia had connected me with Theodore Cross, a whistleblower attorney who specialized in securities fraud cases and had a reputation for taking on powerful corporations and winning against impossible odds. His office was intimidating, law books floor to ceiling, framed newspaper articles about major cases he'd won, and photos with senators and federal judges. He listened with a stone face as I laid out everything I'd discovered, occasionally taking detailed notes but never showing any emotion or reaction. When I finished my presentation, he was quiet for a long, uncomfortable moment that stretched on forever. Then his expression softened just slightly, enough to let me know he wasn't just my attorney. He was on my side. "They didn't fire you over budget cuts, Avery," he said, his voice carrying both authority and genuine concern. "They fired you because you stumbled onto the one thing they couldn't afford for you to know or investigate further." He leaned forward across his mahogany desk, his eyes sharp and predatory like a shark that had smelled blood in the water. This kind of financial manipulation usually happens for a very specific reason. Someone's planning to benefit enormously from making the company look weaker and less valuable than it actually is. The question we need to answer is who stands to profit, and exactly how much money they expect to make from this elaborate deception. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and started sketching a timeline. "In my experience, schemes like this involve either a buyout at a deflated price, insider trading based on hidden information, or both. We're looking at potential prison time for multiple felonies." The gravity of what I'd discovered was finally sinking in. This wasn't just corporate incompetence, it was organized crime wearing business suits. That evening, Riverton announced aggressive cost discipline measures in a carefully crafted press release that made my stomach turn with disgust and rage. Bryce Holloway, the VP who'd fired me with such casual cruelty and obvious satisfaction, gave a lengthy interview on the local business news bragging about his tough leadership during challenging economic times. I watched him from my couch, sick with rage as he smirked about making difficult but necessary decisions to ensure long-term shareholder value and operational sustainability, while knowing he'd just fired the one person who could have exposed his elaborate criminal scheme. He was using my humiliation as his personal stage, painting himself as a decisive leader making hard choices while hiding millions from the very shareholders he claimed to protect with such fake sincerity and corporate doublespeak. The interview lasted 12 agonizing minutes, and every second felt like a personal slap in the face and insult to my intelligence. I swore on everything I held dear that he wouldn't get the final word in this story. Not this time. Justice was coming for Bryce Holloway, and it would be served ice cold with compound interest. 3 days later, the first concrete sign that my whistleblower complaint was gaining serious traction within the company's power structure finally arrived. A board audit committee email hit the executive team. According to Sophia's well-placed source, they'd opened an immediate inquiry into financial reporting irregularities and potential misconduct. Finance department servers were locked down under a comprehensive legal preservation order, preventing anyone from deleting evidence, modifying records, or covering their tracks. Bryce's confident PR spin started cracking as employees whispered in Slack channels about frozen accounts, suspicious payment holds, and emergency board meetings. The storm I'd started was beginning to gather strength and momentum, and the executives who thought they'd silence me permanently were about to learn a painful lesson about underestimating determined women. Change was coming to Riverton Industries like a freight train, whether they wanted it or not. The only question was how many careers would be destroyed when it finally hit. Bryce fought back exactly as I'd expected, with lies, deflection, character assassination, and desperate attempts to discredit my reputation. A leaked internal memo called me an incompetent analyst terminated for consistently poor judgment and fundamental failure to understand basic accounting principles. He wanted to brand me as unreliable, bitter, and too stupid to understand what I'd actually discovered during my investigation. My hands shook with fury as I read his systematic attempt to destroy my professional reputation and credibility. But Theodore, my attorney, leaned across his conference table with a predatory smile that reminded me why he'd never lost a case. "We have your contemporaneous notes, time-stamped and meticulously detailed." His desperate lies are about to blow up in his face spectacularly. "They're completely cornered now, Avery. Just stay calm and let them dig their own graves deeper with every panicked move they make." I released my trump card through Theodore. A month-old email I'd sent to Riverton's legal department, warning about the accounting anomaly and formally requesting clarification on proper procedures. The email had been ignored completely, never even acknowledged or responded to by anyone in the legal department. Now the board chairman's office had it in their hands, along with my detailed follow-up attempts to get answers through proper channels. If I was truly incompetent as Bryce claimed, why had I been raising red flags about this exact issue weeks before he even knew I was conducting any investigation? The timeline destroyed his narrative completely and exposed his lies for what they were. I wasn't a disgruntled former employee making things up out of spite. I was a diligent analyst who discovered fraud and been fired for asking inconvenient questions. The truth was finally starting to see daylight, and it was blinding for those who'd been hiding in shadows. The audit committee's investigation widened rapidly as more evidence surfaced from multiple sources within the company. Olivia Kane, the CFO, desperately tried to explain the $40 million as future vendor credits that don't represent actual cash flow or immediate assets. But the vendor's own quarterly reports and SEC filings contradicted her explanation completely. They clearly showed the rebates as cash payments already made to Riverton in previous quarters. My painstakingly detailed notes matched the vendor data to the cent, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence that couldn't be disputed or explained away. Olivia was trapped in a lie of her own making, caught between her false explanation and the documented reality that dozens of people could now verify. The board was no longer asking whether the money existed, they were demanding to know why it had been hidden and who had specifically authorized the concealment from shareholders and auditors. Corporate whispers revealed an even more sinister picture as the investigation deepened and expanded beyond simple accounting irregularities into something much more dangerous and far-reaching. Bryce and Olivia weren't just hiding money from shareholders, they were deliberately depressing Riverton's valuation ahead of a potential buyout that industry insiders said was imminent and worth hundreds of millions. Reliable rumors suggested a private equity offer from Blackstone Financial was only weeks away from being finalized, and by burying $40 million in legitimate assets, they'd make the company appear weaker and significantly less valuable than it actually was in the marketplace. Someone was positioning themselves to profit massively from this deception, either through insider trading or by being secretly connected to the acquiring group through shell companies and hidden partnerships. The scheme was sophisticated, carefully calculated over months or years, and absolutely illegal under federal securities law with potential criminal penalties. My accidental discovery had exposed a conspiracy that went straight to the top of Riverton's executive team and possibly beyond into the investment community, regulatory agencies, and political connections. As I dug deeper into public records and cross-referenced board connections, I discovered that Olivia Kane had worked at Blackstone Financial for 3 years before joining Riverton. It was either an extraordinary coincidence, or the missing puzzle piece that tied the whole scheme together. If she'd left breadcrumbs this obvious, it meant she either thought nobody would ever find them, or she believed she was untouchable. The web of corruption was vast, intricate, and designed to steal hundreds of millions from innocent shareholders while enriching a small group of connected insiders. I was no longer just fighting corporate fraud, I was taking on an organized criminal enterprise with unlimited resources and dangerous connections. I refused to let anger and bitterness consume me, even as the pressure mounted from all sides and the stakes continued to escalate. Each night, I journaled everything, the fear, the anger, the determination to see justice done regardless of personal cost. My parents called constantly, worried about the stress and the legal battle that was consuming my life. "Maybe it's time to walk away, sweetheart," my mom begged during one particularly difficult conversation when I broke down crying. "You've done your part and exposed the truth. Let someone else finish the fight and take the risks." But I couldn't walk away. Not when I was so close to exposing the full truth and holding these criminals accountable. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about protecting every honest employee and shareholder who deserved better than being robbed by their own executives. If I stayed silent now, Bryce and Olivia would win, and their fraud would continue unchecked while innocent people suffered. What I didn't know was that the next day would bring the crack that would bring down their entire house of cards. Ever wondered what secrets your own company might be hiding? Drop a comment if you've ever suspected something fishy at work. These corporate scandals are more common than you think. And don't forget to hit that like button if you're rooting for Avery to take these fraudsters down. Then came the first major crack in their facade that changed everything and shifted the momentum decisively in my favor. A junior finance associate named Kelly, apparently disgusted by the corruption she'd witnessed firsthand, leaked an internal Slack conversation directly to the board of directors. The leaked chat showed Bryce joking with Olivia about keeping the pool quiet until the ink's dry on our deal, followed by laughing emojis and references to golden parachutes for the smart ones who know when to cash out. He thought he was untouchable, protected by executive privilege and corporate loyalty. Instead, he'd just written his own confession in digital ink, creating the kind of evidence that prosecutors dream about finding in tea. Fired me with such arrogance and obvious satisfaction had destroyed himself with his own hubris and inability to keep his mouth shut when he should have stayed silent. Justice was beginning to taste sweet, and I was savoring every moment of his self-inflicted downfall. His own words would hang him in federal court, and there was no way to take them back or explain them away. The board summoned Bryce for an emergency hearing that was live-streamed to the entire company in the name of transparency. His face, usually smug and confident, was now pale and sweaty as he faced a room full of angry directors demanding answers he couldn't provide. All accounting procedures have been conducted in strict accordance with established protocols and industry standards, he stammered, reading from hastily prepared notes that his lawyers had obviously written. But behind him, employees were leaving Riverton in droves, unwilling to be associated with a company under federal investigation for securities fraud. The confidence facade that had protected him for years was crumbling in real time, broadcast live for everyone to witness. His empire was collapsing brick by brick, and everyone could see it happening in slow motion. The man who'd humiliated me was now being humiliated on a much larger stage, with his reputation being destroyed permanently in front of thousands of viewers. For the first time, Bryce turned his fire directly on me with desperate fury and increasingly unhinged attacks. He filed an ethics complaint with the state professional board, accusing me of misusing confidential company systems to access proprietary information for personal gain and revenge. HR sent me a threatening letter warning of potential legal action for corporate espionage and violation of my employment agreement. I shook reading their accusations and threats, until Theodore started laughing with genuine amusement. "They're bluffing with a losing hand and everyone knows it," he said confidently. "You used publicly available vendor data and your own legitimate work product. This pathetic attack will backfire spectacularly because it proves they're desperate and running out of options." He was absolutely right. Their attempt to intimidate me only highlighted how completely cornered they'd become, and it made them look guilty to everyone watching the situation unfold. Then the federal regulators stepped in, and everything changed overnight in ways nobody had anticipated. Within weeks, not months, the SEC opened a formal investigation into potential securities violations, triggered by the hidden balance sheet manipulation and possible insider trading. But the buried money wasn't just $40 million anymore. It had grown to $62 million over multiple quarters, automatically increasing with Riverton's expanding vendor relationships and improved market position. That growth pushed it well above the mandatory disclosure threshold, making the concealment a clear federal crime with serious prison sentences attached. Securities fraud carries potential prison time of up to 20 years, and suddenly Bryce and Olivia were facing the possibility of federal charges that could destroy their lives permanently. The small accounting irregularity I discovered had exploded into a major criminal investigation that would make national business news and ruin careers permanently. The private equity buyout deal was scheduled to close within days when my discovery torpedoed everything and sent shockwaves through the financial community. If the hidden credits had been properly disclosed earlier, Riverton's valuation would have doubled completely, changing the deal terms and costing the buyers tens of millions more. Bryce and Olivia's budget cut scheme now looked like textbook shareholder fraud designed to steal millions from innocent investors who trusted the company's financial statements. The acquiring firm pulled out immediately, their executives screaming about fraud and threatening their own lawsuits for damages and lost opportunities. Leaked emails showed the conspiracy went even deeper than I'd imagined, with tentacles reaching into the investment banking community. The house of cards wasn't just falling, it was collapsing in spectacular fashion, taking careers and reputations down with it in a financial avalanche that made headlines across the business world. I thought the scandal had reached its peak until another bombshell dropped that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Olivia Kane's brother owned an LLC called Eastfield Partners that was written into the buyout agreement as a consulting firm, with guaranteed contracts worth millions over multiple years. It was a shadow pipeline designed to funnel money to the CFO's family after the deal closed, essentially allowing her to profit twice from the same transaction. The scheme was far more sophisticated than simple accounting fraud. It was a coordinated conspiracy to loot the company while shareholders got pennies on the dollar for their investments. My stomach dropped as I realized how deep the corruption went and how far these people would go to protect their secrets and continue their theft. Had they fired me just to hide their financial manipulation, or were they capable of something even worse to protect their criminal enterprise? Bryce lashed out in pure desperation, rallying his remaining loyalists with increasingly unhinged rhetoric and conspiracy theories. Avery Stone is making all of this up because she's bitter about being fired for incompetence, he shouted in a staff meeting that was immediately leaked to the press and business media. But his paranoid rants only made him look more guilty and unstable, and then came the twist that sealed his fate permanently. One of his own lieutenants flipped, handing the board detailed call logs and internal memos that tied Bryce directly to the Eastfield Partners conspiracy. His most trusted ally had betrayed him, apparently unwilling to go to federal prison for someone else's greed and stupidity. The man who'd fired me for discovering his crimes was now discovering that loyalty only goes so deep when federal charges and 20-year prison sentences are on the table. The buyout collapsed overnight like a house of cards in a hurricane, taking millions in expected profits and bonuses with it. Riverton's board went into emergency session that lasted 14 grueling hours, and by morning, Olivia Kane was suspended pending criminal investigation. Bryce stormed into the office at 6 a.m., red-faced and screaming at the remaining staff members, completely losing the composed facade he'd maintained for years of corporate climbing. His secretary quit on the spot, saying she refused to work for a criminal and a fraud who's going to prison. Videos of him shouting, "I still run this goddamn company," while security tried to calm him down hit social media within hours, going viral as the perfect example of corporate arrogance meeting justice. The comments section was absolutely brutal, thousands of people celebrating his meltdown and calling for his immediate arrest. His empire was falling apart in real time, broadcast live for the world to see, just as he'd humiliated me in front of my colleagues. The poetic justice was almost too perfect to believe, like karma had a personal vendetta against him. Then came the call that changed everything and validated every sacrifice I'd made. The board wanted me back. "We need to rebuild trust and credibility with our shareholders and the business community," the chairman explained during our phone conversation. "We want you to return, not as an employee, but as special advisor for financial integrity with complete independence and authority." I sat in stunned silence, my heart pounding with disbelief and vindication. But I understood the real reason behind their offer. They didn't come back out of trust or respect. They came back out of fear, pure and simple. Fear that I'd take my findings straight to federal regulators if they tried to sideline me again. Fear that I'd go public with even more damaging information I might have uncovered. The same board that had ignored my warnings for weeks, the same executives who'd let me be fired for discovering fraud, now wanted me to lead their cleanup efforts and restore their reputation. The irony was delicious and satisfying beyond my wildest dreams of revenge. They needed me now, desperately, and this time I'd be setting all the terms of engagement. Power had shifted completely, and I was holding all the cards in a game they could no longer afford to lose. I returned to Riverton, but strictly on my non-negotiable conditions that protected my interests and ensured justice. I demanded complete operational independence, full restitution for all laid-off employees who'd been scapegoated, and a substantial licensing fee for the fraud detection system I'd developed during my investigation, Bright Ledger. The board agreed to everything without negotiation. They were too desperate and legally exposed to refuse any of my terms. Watching security escort Bryce Holloway out of the building was the most poetic moment of my entire life and career. He walked the exact same humiliating path I'd taken weeks earlier, carrying a cardboard box just like I had, while I watched from the executive floor with a sense of complete vindication. The man who destroyed my morning was now having his entire career destroyed in return, with interest. Justice had been served cold, and it tasted absolutely perfect. 7 weeks after being fired over budget cuts, I stood in the corner office that once belonged to Bryce Holloway, looking out at the city skyline from the executive floor where I now held ultimate authority over financial operations. Reporters outside called me the whistleblower who saved Riverton Industries from financial ruin, and the company had just signed a $7 million licensing agreement for Bright Ledger, but that was just Riverton, the first domino to fall. Other companies were already lining up, and the contracts ahead were worth hundreds of millions as the entire industry scrambled to implement fraud detection systems. Emails were already pouring in from Fortune 500 CFOs. What Riverton tried to bury was about to become my empire. Bryce was bankrupt in reputation and forgotten by the industry that once celebrated his leadership, facing federal charges that would likely send him to prison for decades where his arrogance wouldn't protect him. Olivia faced multiple felony counts including securities fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering, and would spend years behind bars paying for her greed and betrayal of shareholder trust. The private equity deal had collapsed completely, costing Blackstone Financial tens of millions in lost opportunities and legal fees as they scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. 3 board members had resigned in disgrace, and the SEC was conducting a full investigation that would lead to new regulations and oversight requirements across the industry. I whispered to the glass windows and city lights below, never underestimate a woman with receipts and the courage to use them against powerful men who think they're untouchable. The best revenge isn't just exposing the truth, it's making your enemies pay you millions for the privilege of cleaning up the mess they created through their own criminal stupidity and arrogance. Sometimes justice wears a business suit and charges premium consulting fees for fixing what criminals broke, and sometimes the little girl who was told to stay quiet becomes the woman who brings down an empire. From that corner office where corruption once flourished, I was building something better, a financial integrity system that would prevent future fraud and protect honest employees and shareholders from corporate predators. The view from the top was beautiful, especially when you'd earned it by fighting for justice. What's the craziest workplace corruption you've ever witnessed? Share your own corporate drama stories in the comments. We love hearing about justice being served. Don't forget to subscribe for more mind-blowing stories of underdogs who fought back and won big. These revenge tales prove that sometimes the little guy really does get the last laugh.